I would maintain we as human beings are designed with purpose. Like it's built into us. Like God gave us his image. Like we understand there's some sense you can't actually live nihilism. That's why I maintain existentialism crops up, because I think the vast majority of nihilists in history either go insane or they end up committing suicide.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hey Culture. My name is Rainer Fermel, and this is a podcast where we speak about art, philosophy, ideas, religion, anything that has an impact on your culture and your everyday life. A lot of times, ideas have consequences, and we don't even know the ideas that we are impacted by. Joining me today is our first ever recurring guest, Dr. Thomas McCuddy. Some of you might know that on a previous episode, we spoke a bit about naturalism, and today he's back to speak to us about nihilism. Dr. Thomas, welcome.
I'm glad I got that distinction. I will carry that with honor. So
Yeah, you definitely can. And it's an honor that you are the person that is the first person to be on here twice. For those of you who don't know, who Thomas McCuddy is, you can look at our previous episode. But just briefly, he's a professor of apologetics at CCBS, Carolina College of Biblical Studies, and is also the president of a ministry called Families of Virtue, where they are teaching people on discipleship to become disciple makers, and it's all founded on what virtue is. Okay, Thomas, I'm guessing today we're going to jump into what is nihilism. So, what would best describe nihilism?
it is simplistic in the sense that the Latin nihil means nothing, and so nihilism is the general catch-all philosophy. It's the result as we slide out of theism, deism. You lose meaning, you lose purpose. There is no meaning. There is no purpose. Ultimately, we talked a little bit in the last one about how under naturalism, if everything is just material that's been reordered, then we lose all sense of actual value. And this is again where you'll fall into nihilism. So it's a reaction. It is, I believe Sire calls it the child of naturalism. It's where you end up. It's almost a logical consequence that when you remove God, it's I would say impossible to not fall into this idea that there is no meaning, no purpose, no actual truth, no value, nothing that ultimately binds or guides other than the material universe.
Okay, it's simplistic, but it's also a mouthful.
It is, and it's interesting the way it manifests, because we've had at my church, which again we're sort of a country church outside of Fayetteville. Even in our little church, we've had teenagers who come in who'll be self-proclaimed nihilists, and it's always interesting when I encounter that. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And they start telling me like what that means for them, and I'm like, again, it's interesting because I think many people will use this term, but they don't understand the implications. They don't understand what they're really buying into with this full system. Because I think what happens within nihilism, most people think, when you really read the nihilist, like it's kind of depressing. And that's the point. I mean, that's why many of the nihilists, they said you have to embrace the fact that there is no meaning, there is no purpose. As soon as you accept that, and they do this in various ways, even in the literature, you talk about art, that again, if there is no meaning, there's no purpose. That's why you can take a pile of garbage and throw that in the middle of an art gallery and you have art, because there is no transcendent beauty. There is no transcendent meaning. And this is what modern art tries to portray with literally this kind of garbage, if I can put it that way. Like that's what it is.
That is what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we've touched on it a bit in a previous episode, but why is there no meaning in a naturalistic framework, and going into nihilism? Why would you just touched on transcendent beauty. What does that mean, the word transcendent, for those who aren't familiar with philosophy, and why is there no meaning in the system?
Well, and because when you're in naturalism and everything has a chemical composition. So, what is the actual genetic makeup or chemical composition of beauty? That beauty is only then your subjective experience. This is why we say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because there's no real beauty in things and of themselves. Beauty then just becomes everybody's reaction. This is why I've often mentioned, that platitude, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is not a Christian idea. Not at all. Beauty is an attribute of God, that we maintain that God in his nature is beautiful. And that's why even if somebody is terrified by the sight of God, that doesn't make God ugly. God's beauty is not dependent upon us perceiving him. He has that beauty. It transcends sensory experience. That the beauty is in the thing itself. I would maintain it's a real thing. But for the naturalistic world, everything has to have a chemical composition, an atomic makeup. And beauty doesn't have that. Justice doesn't have that. Goodness doesn't have that. There is no such thing as transcendent goodness. There's only utility. What does this do for me? And this is why Nietzsche, who sort of represents in many ways nihilism, and eventually later I know you'll do with existentialism. It's another byproduct, but the Nietzsche's nihilism, that there's no there is no good, there is no evil, there's just the will to power. That you need the power. If you have the power, you can exert your will, and that's what will make you happy. But you don't have to worry about things like, am I doing what's good? No such thing. Am I when we talk about justice, we only talk about it in a relativistic manner. Am I following the random laws that have been made? Even when you get into like Hobbes and Rousseau, they view government as kind of this necessary evil. Like the government just exists so we don't kill each other. That was why Nietzsche, when he bemoaned the death of God, and he said, God is dead. We've killed him. The murderer of all murderers. How shall we comfort ourselves? And he recognizes that without God, there's no restraining moral order. Why will humans, like, we're going to completely destroy ourselves? And it's fascinating. So I've been reading the Dune series. I've been listening to them through Audible, and I'm at the very last of the books. And so for those who aren't familiar with Dune, it's long sci-fi. I know new movies have come out that just touches the beginning of it, but it's very much a godless world. This is what Frank Herbert promotes. And again, no spoilers, but as I was getting into the very last of the books, just started it today, the whole idea that humanity is facing extinction, and this one particular group, they're like, yeah, we'll help you fight this war, but it's going to cost you, and we really need to turn a profit. And they're like, all of humanity is about to be destroyed. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but again, profit. It was like, what? It's like, well, if we're going to live, we're going to profit. We're going to have this. You look at this universe he's painted, and one of the struggles is, what if humanity is destroyed? So what? What is the ultimate meaning, purpose of the human being? And he's painted this grandiose universe where there is none. There's a sense, like, you come to care, you personally care about the characters, but there's no real meaning. There's no real goodness, no essence to that. It's just stuff happening. And that's why again, when you look at nihilism as a philosophy, I would maintain we as human beings are designed with purpose. Like it's built into us. Like God gave us his image. Like we understand there's some sense you can't actually live nihilism. That's why I maintain existentialism crops up, because I think the vast majority of nihilists in history either go insane or they end up committing suicide. It's not a pleasant road to walk on, and but again, I think it's one of those, if you've removed God, you don't have any other option. And the nihilist writings sort of, they communicate that. They're like, we have to come to terms with our meaninglessness. Like, okay, that's one way to approach it, but I think it goes against the reality we see. We see a reality of meaning and purpose and goodness, and they, in some sense, force themselves into this mindset. That makes sense.
That definitely made sense. So I'm guess based on what you said of people either going insane or committing suicide, it's also not the most sustainable of worldviews.
It's one of those. Even Jacques Maritain, who was one of the major Thomist philosophers in the early 1900s, he and his wife, French nihilistic existential philosophy, they had made a suicide pact. They basically said they gave themselves 1 year that if they could not find meaning and purpose within that year, they would kill themselves. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you see. They're just like, well, what's the point? And because of the writings of Thomas Aquinas, Maritain ends up coming into Christianity. He finds that meaning and purpose. He understands that it's not just a fictitious or manufactured purpose. He finds real purpose. And but his story is one where there's many who make these kinds of these pacts, these ideas, and they don't find that meaning and purpose, or they just slide into this darkness where there was a movie years ago. It's called I Heart Huckabees. Stupid movie. Don't recommend it. Anybody who goes out and tries to watch that movie, like, that's on you. I used to work at a video store, so I had to watch these movies that came through. It's a terrible movie. But in it, you have a nihilist, and his daughter wants to do something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but let's say that she was trying out for the soccer team, and she's trying out, and this nihilist, he's like, what does it matter? In 100 years, we're all dead, and anytime anybody tried to do anything like this, that's what this guy was. He was sort of like this comedic trope. He was coming in, we're all going to die. It doesn't matter. But he was genuinely, in many ways, demonstrating full-blown nihilism. Like, that's what it really looks like when it's unmitigated, when it's unfiltered. That's where you find yourself. You can't function. Nothing matters. And I almost want to start singing Bohemian Rhapsody. So you have Queen, who has that, and nothing really matters. Like, that's why in the song you've got this interesting beginning, and then in the middle you have completely nonsensical lyrics. You have this disconnected system of music. It's bizarre, but that's because there's no meaning. Many people, what is the meaning behind Bohemian Rhapsody? It's like, literally, they're trying to show you there's no meaning, there's no purpose. And they made an amazing hit song, and it doesn't mean anything. It's just, that's the point of it. And you find yourself in the true nature of it. Bohemian Rhapsody does use rules of music. It does actually bring a lot of order, though it's trying to communicate there's no order, there's no meaning. So it's nihilism is one of those. I would maintain Bohemian Rhapsody would demonstrate that you can't be consistent. That ultimately you're going to find meaning. You're going to have find purpose. And obviously the band Queen had great motive and found purpose in singing a song that there is no meaning, there is no purpose. You with me? It's almost
I'm with you.
self-defeating.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. I'm going to remember that one, that Bohemian Rhapsody is like the best example to use contemporarily to show people that you can't be consistent. You have to kind of contradict yourself in it. That is interesting. Okay, so we touched a bit on that, how it came to be, that it was like the natural child of naturalism. It was the logical consequence of it. to kind of put it in a framework, what does nihilism say about epistemology? I'm guessing it would be the same as naturalism, but just for our viewers, what does nihilism say about epistemology? How do we know truth?
Well, and because of naturalism, everything is, atoms, and at least within naturalism, you're going to find a lot more science that goes into it. And the nihilist can be scientific, but there's no reason, there's no purpose. Why have scientific progress? It ultimately has no purpose, ultimately has no meaning. So you're not going to spend a lot of time developing epistemological systems if there's no meaning and there's no purpose to it. So that's why there's, in a sense, a simplicity. It doesn't mean that nihilists can't have a sophisticated epistemology. There's just not a reason for them to. There's no, like, why spend all this time understanding what knowledge is and what truth is if none of it ultimately matters? There's no point to it. So that's why when you have a sophisticated nihilist, you must ask the question, why? Why even bother with that? There's a sense that you can be dismissive, because that's what nihilism is doing. It's dismissing any sense of truth, goodness, and beauty. So everything then becomes really about perception. It becomes about deciding what helps you function or what brings you meaning and purpose that you sort of impose, but that slides over into existentialism, the atheistic branch of existentialism. So to say, what is the nihilistic epistemology? It's whatever what you want it to be. It doesn't matter, because anytime you try to say, this is how I know truth, you can either deny that truth is even real, or you simply say, it doesn't really matter. You've obtained truth. So what? And what is truth? Again, because you push it far enough, there is no such thing as truth. It becomes Nietzsche was good with this. He mentioned, that there are no facts. It was only interpretations. That he said, I forget his exact quote, but that was how he sort of operated. It's only interpretations. It's only perceptions. Nothing really in and of itself. It's just in terms of your own historical situatedness. You must interpret these things. You must, I forget the exact quote, but it was, again, nothing is really true in and of itself. It's just your own particular perceptions. And you push the nihilism far enough, those perceptions don't even matter. So what if you believe this? It doesn't, nothing follows from that. Nothing follows from nothing.
I'm jumping a few episodes ahead of myself, but does nihilism then kind of pave the road for postmodernism eventually?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because once you've disconnected from all truth, purpose, you have to insert that somehow, which is where you're going to move into existentialism. And that's why postmodernism says that there's no overarching narratives. There's no view that truly explains reality, because again, if nothing really matters and everything is based upon perception, postmodernism then begins to develop from that. It's on that foundation of what's going to help us move along. What do we personally value? So they're leaving nihilism behind. They're going to say, we are going to find value. We're going to create value. This is what we're going to value. This is what is valuable to me. And we're going to have enough of a tribe that we're going to exert our effort. We're going to reshape the world this way, because this is what is meaningful to us. This is what is important to us. And they might even say, tolerance and pluralism, unless you don't believe that, then we're going to eliminate you, or just, push you out. It becomes a reshaping of the world in complete relativism. That's what nihilism in many ways have paved that road for. Whereas Kant, and again, in the early philosophers, when they develop an epistemology that begins with thought and everything becomes about perspective, well, that was the epistemology. Now with nihilism, it's not so much the epistemology. This is what they're making this statement ontologically. This is the metaphysics. This is ultimate reality. that there is no meaning, there is no purpose. So that's why the epistemology would work then. It's just your perspective, it's whatever you want. So now you have this hodgepodge between this idealism, this nihilism. Ontologically, you move into what we have, our almost said modern postmodernism. That's a little strange. Our postmodernism isn't even really current anymore. We're sort of past that. I think the most recent term I've heard was meta-modernism. This shift, whereas postmodernism was all, there's no narratives, you everything is relative. Meta-modernity has decided that they have planted their feet. They have begun with their ethical conclusions. In other words, this is what is right and wrong. Okay, they've started with ethics. They're now building their system around that. It's complete reversal from the classical system that says things are, here's how we think about them, now here's what you do about it. They've begun with, here's what I think we ought to do, so I'm going to shape the world around that. And nihilism gives you that ability to do that. It's what's paved the way for it, because the human experience is that there do seem to be some things that are true, good, and beautiful. But when you don't start with what is, you're just going to start with what you believe is good and try to fit everything around that. And like I said, nihilism is in some ways that hinge, that focal point, that maybe if you think the broad view of, we'll go this way, we'll hourglass. You think the broad view of theism and everything and how it began to narrow and the world began to shrink with deism and then naturalism. We keep shrinking metaphysically the universe down to nothing but atoms. And now we shrink all the way with nihilism. There's no meaning. There's no purpose. Things are, and so what? Like, I mean, that's where we are. Well, as human beings, again, we're designed to have that meaning, that purpose. We can't function otherwise. Nietzsche even said that. He said, if a man understands why, he can endure anything. So he gets that. And this is where you're going to start branching out again with existentialism, the new age, your own personal spirituality. You get into, again, postmodernism. I'm going to reshape the world in my own image. And now to meta-modernity, where here's my goals and I'm going to create systems in order to get me there. It is very much not a slippery. You can trace the lineage all the way down. And like I said, I think nihilism was that final moment where all the meaning, all the purpose, all the meta narrative is sort of bottlenecked, and nihilism will not allow that to come through. And everything that's below that is the result from that in many ways.
Wow. To get back to what you quickly mentioned about meta modernity is deciding what we should do and then going back and reinterpreting reality accordingly to that. I'm also guessing that the people who are deciding what we should do also the neo-Marxist types. So it's also then based upon the oppressed thing of what should be happening, and then they reinterpret reality accordingly.
When you get in those conversations, you'll hear people say it. They'll say it, here's how I see the world. And based upon how they see the world, they build the system out from that. So Marxism gives them a way to see the world, and they say, well, here's how I see the world. And they'll utilize the Marxist framework and then again, restructure everything. But that's what nihilism allowed us to do, is to say, here's how I see the world, and thus it is. Whereas the classical system said, there is a world, and I need to figure it out. At least in many ways, for the classical naturalists, that's what they were trying to do. They're trying to figure out what, they would be asking, what is a human being, at least from an animal standpoint? What is a man and a woman from a biological genetic point? And they would ground in that, because the world is, and the universe is a composition, and they're trying to understand that. You get into nihilism and the composition no longer matters. None of this is relevant. This is why, again, you have a person who has an XY chromosome, and you can look at them and say, well, I can call that a woman, even though a woman is an XX chromosome. I'm going to call this XY, a woman. And because it doesn't matter, the reality itself doesn't determine what the person believes. In that sense, when you've disconnected that much, that's why I think many believers and many people today, they're so confused. They're just like, but just look at it. Just look at what you have. And they don't understand. People are coming from this mindset. Looking doesn't matter. The There's no real reality in and of itself. It's only my perceptions. My perception is reality. And they've taken even that bumper sticker phrase, perception is reality. I always tell people that's not a Christian phrase either. But this is what we've seen in our modern world. This is what nihilism has allowed. Until we went through the waters of nihilism, we weren't able to do that. Reality was too much in our face. Like, that you had to deal with this. And in the shifting of the worldview as culture has moved, the mindset has disconnected. And you have those who are growing up who are disconnected from reality. So it doesn't bother them in that sense. Like they can do that because they've been doing it. And there is almost a sense they don't know better. Like if you've grown up in that mind frame, you've not really considered, for lack of a better term, the vulgarity of what you're doing, that you're just looking at the thing and declaring that it is not. There's the classical, even just the classical philosophers just cringe, whether or not they're Christian or atheists. The classical philosophers are like, the thing is what it is, the law of identity. Nihilism breaks from all that. You don't have to adhere to the law of identity. You almost end up with again, this is what happens in the Eastern religions. They ignore those various first laws of thought for contradiction to perceive the spiritual world however they want to. The Western version, we're just, not really spiritual. It's all more of a naturalistic, atheistic version that we've created. But we're in some ways doing the same thing. Just again, the East does it from a spiritual, pantheistic, monistic sense. We like to do it from a naturalistic, monistic sense. All of the universe is one piece of matter, and it's however we perceive it.
Yeah, and the one side is driven by spirituality, their view of spirituality, and then the Western side is driven by what they call science. Yeah,
and I think that's important. What they call science, I think that's an important phrase. I don't know if you know how important that phrase is, because what some people call science is not science. Okay, not in the classical sense of the knowledge of the world. Again, going back to scientia, this idea that this knowledge, this branch of understanding, for the classical philosophers, science was unchanging truths, the things that absolutely must be. That's why science was not learning the data of the average weight of a sparrow. Okay, now that's a fact. That's data. We can talk about average weight. We can talk about what a fat sparrow is and a unhealthy sparrow. We can talk about all those things. But the nature, what makes the sparrow, and what is according to nature, that is this unchanging knowledge, that was science in the classical sense. That's what the Christian worldview as scientists sought. What is this creation that we've been given? How do we understand it? Because as we encounter all this various data, we can take that into consideration with the larger nature and the unchanging natures we understand. So with nihilism, we've broken from all of that. Now science is only a matter of data collection. It's only a matter of what we think of the things, because again, it's interesting to me the number of people who will say follow the science back when we were having lockdown, but at the same time we're saying that there's no such thing as a man or a woman, and that these people are claiming that men can have periods. And I'm like, no, like that's not how that works. Like that's not possible. They're not a man. That's not the nature of the man. And so again, that, like, what do we even mean by science? In a nihilistic world, it's whatever you want, because there is no meaning, there is no purpose, there is no nature, there's nothing binding us ultimately. There's just individual perceptions. And so that's why what do they mean when they say science? Sometimes I'm not sure. Like, this is where you have to ask people, like when you say science, what do you mean by that? Because it might just simply be, again, a collection of data that they interpret however they want to, which I would say that's not science at that point. But anyway,
Where did we get? Because while you was talking, I also thought about the lockdowns and especially with the vaccines, where they just said follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. And where did we get to a point where science, the word the science, could be thrown around like some sort of authority in culture, and people to kind of hit people over the head with it?
I forget which book. I know Turek talks about this. Frank Turek, in one of his books, talks about the politicizing of science. That he actually, there's a chart where if you take a basic survey of the literature starting like 1800s and sort of the way science is used that way, and it's almost this exponential growth in terms of using science as the authority. Science says, therefore it is. And it's still very much in our culture where even I love journals. I'm very much a writer, and if you've been around me, you know I love fountain pens. You know I love journals. So there's even journals, Christian journals, that are designed with prompts and various things. And at the beginning, inevitably, you're always going to have scientifically demonstrated to bring results, even among this Christian literature. Like, everybody has to put that in there. Scientific, based upon the latest neuroscientific research, this is helping your brain do this, and that's going to help you with your walk with Jesus. So, I mean, it's like they feel compelled. And that's why, like, in our literature, we begin with, this is in absolutely no way scientifically verified, and we don't care. It's just the nature of things. You don't have to have a scientific experiment to verify it. We've approached in our world where something is not true, at least in certain circles. Something's not true unless an experiment has been done to demonstrate it. I simply do not give science that power to say that if it hasn't been demonstrated through an experiment that it's not true. There are many things we know that are true, and that experiment didn't get us that. This is where, again, the classical philosopher, there are just some things that are self-evident that I don't have to perform I don't have to follow Francis Bacon in order to know things for sure. So I think we've allowed that in our culture. I think that, again, the Christian publishing industry has bought into it, because this is my personal opinion, so no reflection upon your podcast. It sells more books that way when it's scientifically verified. So we've become part of the problem. And in our culture, we want to know what's true. And again, nihilism, as we're talking about, disconnects from all truth. So at least if you've got some scientific experimentation, you've got some sort of evidence, some sort
Something
of
to hold on
proof.
to.
Yeah, it offers an anchor point. Like, why would you want to do this? We've done scientific experiments that get good results. That's why you should want to do this. And so it's a marketing ploy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think yeah, the advertising community and advertising world kind of they've grabbed onto that thing.
Absolutely. And that's why we sort of rage against it. And I even have a friend of mine, a professor out at a Southern Evangelical Seminary, Bernard Mauser, wrote a book on hermeneutics. And there's a small group of us like that. I read, when you get his book on how to interpret the Bible, he has all these quotes at the beginning, because people will use all these quotes and try to, like, when all these celebrities and all these people, oh, look at what they're saying. Well, he's got quotes from, like, George Washington and Socrates promoting his book, and you read it, you look at it, just like, this is amazing. Like, just his whole humor is just like, obviously these guys didn't write these reviews, but it's almost, that's the way we do it. We take the cult of personality, we take the cult of science. We're grasping for something to point us in the right direction. We want to know that what we're doing is good and true and useful. We have an innate desire for this. And that's what nihilism severs. You don't have that anymore. And our culture is grasping for whatever it can. Science has always been the go-to, except I think in recent, now it's your tribe, that you do something, and if the tribe approves of it, that's your validation. That's how you know what you're doing is good and where you can find fulfillment, because you have that external validation, which is a very dangerous place to be.
It is, and if you do things that the tribe doesn't approve of, they kind of perform a modern version of mob justice and cancel you or put pressure on you.
You become excommunicated from the group, the cancel culture, and that's how people sometimes view things. They'll say, "Oh, I used to follow this guy, but he made this mistake, and now nobody likes him, so you shouldn't follow him." And it's like, it's truth by majority vote, truth by what's popular. There's so many issues that go into that, and we also as Christians are prone to that same thing, because even again, another professor at SES, Dr. Thomas Howe, when his book Objectivity and Biblical Interpretation, that I will often teach from, he had to self-publish it because no Christian publisher would touch this thing, because he's demonstrating philosophically the hermeneutics books are contradictory, and he does so leaving no stone unturned. And he goes through this because he's not making opinionated claims, he demonstrates it. But because of that, it's a self-published book. And I was just reading, there was comments, people are saying, "Oh, don't quote that book. It's a self-published book. It doesn't have what follows from that? It doesn't have clout. It doesn't have weight. It's not true. You have to publish something in order for it to have validity." We have a very strange kind of view in Christianity right now that I would maintain is in many ways influenced by these kinds of naturalism, nihilism, existentialism ideas, and we're not even sitting back and questioning them. I think this is why this issue of worldview is so critical, because these worldviews that are around us, we start adopting these ideas without even stopping to examine and think about what we're saying and why that idea doesn't fit. Kind of like the hermeneutics books that Hal was pointing out, they say that they'll quote almost Nietzsche saying, everything's about interpretation, that we all have our baggage, we all, come, and so we can't be objective. Okay. That's a very postmodern idea that comes, again, out of the nihilism, all that, you can't be objective. Everybody has their historical situation. But yet all the evangelical hermeneutics books then go to find the meaning of the text. Let us go and let us use this method and pull out the meaning. And the method's awesome. The method is you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. You're pulling out the meaning, but we're not going to call that the objective meaning. Well, then what is it? It's just your subjective understanding. And they'll say things like, well, we can't be totally objective. And what I love in Hal's book, he's like, well, what in the world does that mean? like, what is this thing? You use these terms. What Hal shows is that because of the influence, going back, not even like Nietzsche, you go into Gadamer, you go into all these guys, we as Christianity have adopted these ideas. And that's why I think understanding nihilism and reading the nihilists are so important, from the stance that we as Christians have sometimes absorbed those ideas. That the number one time when I'm with the teenagers and I ask them, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, who said it? And inevitably they'll all say Kelly Clarkson, because of her song. Okay.
Yeah.
Inevitably. I mean, that's the modern generation, Kelly Clarkson. I'm like, no, Nietzsche was the one who was often quoted for this the most. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's because there's no real truth. It's just a matter of perseverance, to be strong, to exert your will. And we don't even realize, there is a Christian idea there that when we face trials, we learn perseverance. but that's because it builds character and leads to hope. That is a very different idea from we go through these trials that don't kill us, that make us stronger so we can exert our will and dominate and have whatever version of happiness we wish. We don't understand where these ideas are coming from, and sometimes we grab them and we might be traveling along in that same vein, not even realizing, not even knowing that we have separated from the Christian worldview and the Christian mindset because we are not strong with the idea of Christian metaphysics, Christian epistemology, and Christian ethics.
Well, I think in terms of epistemology, alternate reality, and humanity, the answer is going to be the same thing, that nothing really matters. So there is not, like, it's atoms and matter in terms of what is the ultimate reality, and that's basically
all it is, and it's your perception of them as well. So that's why, are we reaching a place where, again, you look at the atomic weight of a hydrogen atom and you're like, well, that is what it is. And somebody can look at it and go, nuh-uh, that's not what I think it is. And most in the scientific community would balk at that. But that's where, again, whether you have like, I'm trying to remember my science, because it's the one electron around the one proton. I mean, I think that's hydrogen, your most basic element. And you're like, look, that's what it is. It should be pretty simple. Well, again, this person has an XY chromosome makeup. That's a man. And you have culture going, nuh-uh. And yet we're okay with that. Well, you can only play that game so long before you end up, and we might end up saying, well, if you confuse hydrogen with helium, you're gonna have a really bad day, or hydrogen with oxygen, you're gonna have a really bad day. There's consequences. Like, well, there's consequences too, to recognize, if a person has an XY chromosomal package, then once they get later in life, they're going to need a prostate check. Like, women don't have to worry about things like prostate cancer. Okay. That's important. Like, there are consequences to this as well, because I maintain reality is real, and it's not simply a matter of perception. Nihilism brought in, there is whatever we want to call reality, and it's just our perception. Nothing really matters. Again, you can say that, but I think what history has shown, you can't live that. And I think that's where we are in a big way in our modern society, that a lot of people are saying things and it's just simply unlivable. And it was nihilism, I think, that first taught us to play that game.
Okay. Then I want to get into, I think, for this episode, what are some of the real life consequences we've seen in our culture, in the world, because of the nihilistic ideas? And do we see we've touched on some of them, but how dire is it? How big is the influence that it had on our world today?
Well, I think that when you look at the 20th century, and we look at the kinds of wars we had and the kinds of things that went on, the reason why I'm glad nihilism didn't have a stronger hold, even though Nietzsche had been, cold in the grave for 40 plus years before before World War II really got going. You look at this and you see, in many ways, I would maintain Hitler, who loved Nietzsche. Okay, Nietzsche was his hero. Hitler believed himself to be that Uberman, the Superman that Nietzsche sort of foretold. In many ways, Hitler puts Nietzsche and some of these ideas into practice. That it's just his will to power. This is the way he perceives it. He reconstructed the facts, everything, to fit his program. He began experimenting on human beings. The world had enough of a theistic worldview to recoil in horror in what was going on. I think what's happening in a lot of the ways in our world is, as the nihilism continues to as kids are raised with this issue, they are we're coming into the kind of world where, and we'll take the abortion debate for example. You show a dismembered fetus, which clearly many times looks like, like it's a baby, like it's a baby. And there's almost a sense in our world where, so what? There's no real meaning. There's no real purpose. Like there should be a sense, and the reason why many of the pro-life movement would show these pictures is because it's shocking and it's horrifying. In a world where there's no meaning and purpose, it's irrelevant. It is, yep, that's a dismembered baby. And I mean, again, look at what the Nazis did. Some of the records, they would take Jewish babies and they would throw them up in the air and catch them on bayonet spears. What is the difference between that, other than location and just a little bit of time, compared to what is when we have a dismembered baby through a medical procedure? In a world where there's no meaning, no purpose, no real natures, everything is just the random assortment of atoms. You only have perspective. You only have perceptions. And as that is played out on a wide scale, you're going to end up with absolute atrocities, and everybody's going to be like, so what? One of the more, I think, telling moments, there's a book that was turned into a movie called The Giver, where it looks at like a post dystopian world where everything is controlled. In the movie, one of the this bothered me greatly in the movie. It's a great movie, by the way. So that is one of the things. You want to go see a good movie, watch The Giver. In this movie, where this society is constructed, there's the giver knows humanity's history and has to pass that on. That's the idea of the giver. So this kid is receiving all of humanity's history where no one knows the history. So this kid's dad works in the equivalent of a hospital, and a baby is born, and the baby's a few grams underweight. Okay. Now, again, I'm an American. We don't think in grams. Okay. We think in pounds. Those are bigger. But I know grams are not much. Okay. I don't know what a gram is, but I know it's not much. Okay. So few grams underweight. And the dad cannot get the baby to meet the threshold. So there's this scene where the dad euthanizes the baby, like basically sticks a needle, it'll be over soon. He's talking to the baby, killing the baby, and they CGI show it. Like, I got boys, and this hurt. Like this, I watched this, like it's disturbed me. His son, who's watching this, is freaked out. He's like, he's murdering the baby. And the giver says he doesn't know what that word means. He's lost the concept. Nihilism has in many ways destroyed the concepts. It's destroyed that meaning, destroyed that purpose. And they don't even see. They don't recognize what is. That's the consequences. That's where we're going to live in a world where not just babies, but humans, adult humans of various ethnicities, ages, socioeconomic status, nothing matters. What's the best solution? What's going to give us the kind of world we want? You're going to end up in the consequences is really a Thanos kind of world. We get to eliminate the population as best suits us. And I would say we already see this in places like France. I think it was France that boasted that they had cured Down syndrome. Okay, maybe it might not be France. It might be. I can stand to be corrected, but I know there's a country that boasted that it cured Down syndrome. I know France is one of those that does this. They didn't cure it. They've aborted every single Down syndrome baby. That every human being that has Down syndrome is not allowed to live. And I know for a fact it was France that banned using any Down syndrome actors in any kind of commercial because they didn't want women to feel bad for killing their Down syndrome babies.
Wow.
That's the world we're living in. That is if I can use the word, a minor example of how this is going to continue to play out. That you're going to find people are not allowed to live because, again, it infringes upon what? My economic bottom line. I don't want that kind of responsibility. We're doing this with babies in the womb. Peter Singer, again, the American professor, he's Harvard, Yale, one of those. I can't remember. He's up in one of those. Who says he advocates you can kill a baby up to 2 years after it's been born. They're not even really people. And he says our society won't accept this. So he says 30 days. 30 days you can kill a baby. And I can speak as a professor grading papers from pastors who have agreed that you can kill a baby up to 30 days after it's been born if it's the loving thing to do. I have had to grade papers like this. So you can't tell me it's not a huge influence. You can't tell me that these ideas aren't seeping in, because what we have is Christian love, but this confusion that's brought in by the world, and it's been blended. And I see this happening inside of Christianity as well. And that's why we need to understand these ideas. We need to understand the implications. We need to have these kinds of conversations. Because again, as a Bible college professor, I get to, in some ways, briefly connect, and I make people that you might wonder, just in case anybody wonders, the concept of the paper, the title of it was "When is it right to kill a baby?" And what I wanted students to do was to find arguments for post-birth abortion and refute them. That was the goal. Most of my students found Peter Singer's work, because you start typing in that stuff, Singer's going to come up. But this one particular student found Singer, quotes him, talks about 2 years is too much, 30 days is legitimate, and agrees if it's the loving Christian thing to do, we have a responsibility to kill that baby if it's the loving Christian thing to do. Because we have cut from reality, and now it just becomes perceptions, values, and other things. So it's immensely important for the church to understand how to engage.
That is horrifying. That is horrifying. Well, sure. If so, I'm thinking of the book of Romans, that the law is written on our hearts, and that kind of a scripture was showing that there is a objectivity in morality, and that we have a sense of what morality should be. Do you think because of these different worldviews are something people are reasoning up, that they are thinking themselves into this direction, if that makes sense what I'm saying? Do you think we can get to a place where you can numb yourself so much that you can kind of numb everything? Kind of answering myself, I think Romans 1 already says that you're kind of giving yourself, God will give you over to the depravity of your mind.
Well, part of it is the giving over of the mind. When you consider, and I believe it was England that sought to do this. I think I remember a report years ago. The teachers, the education board in England, said that if they could train the children to accept LGBTQ, then all you need is just one generation, and then everybody accepts it. These ideas, that's in some ways where you sear the conscience, that when you have children, you raise them up in this way, that's what they know. That's what's normal to them. They might have a sense of this is wrong, but they won't understand anything differently. That's why even, and I've always been clear, in my upbringing, I come from a long line of Irish pagans. So when we were growing up, we yelled. Like it was constant. I just thought everybody did that. I thought that's how everybody communicated. And when I met my wife and we were dating, and the first time she came home, she like goes to a friend's house just crying. Like, everybody yells at each other. What is this? Why are they so dysfunctional? I didn't have that even as a mindset that it was dysfunctional. Like, I didn't even know I was going against good human relationships and interaction. I didn't know that. I didn't have that category. So I think some of the being handed over to depravity, that's what we find. This is why families are so important, and why the attack on the family has been so vehement, because again, if you can destroy the family, you can destroy the source of virtue and goodness. That my children, I'm able, that in this world, when they get hit with these ideas, that I can take them and we can debrief, we can talk about them, we can engage them, and I can raise them up to understand what is true, good, and beautiful. And the world wants to eliminate that, and what you end up with, you end up raising an entire generation of people for whom sin is good, that evil is good and good is bad. So
Wow.
that's why the law is written in our hearts, but you can train up a child in a way that he or she ought not to go, and they may not depart from it. It works the other way as well. And that's why I think, again, the battle with the family is such an important part of this. And it almost becomes, like, I know a lot of ministries out there and talk about, oh, family, that's kind of, like low ball, it's not interesting, those kinds of things. It is the front line of changing the culture, because it's not going to happen through the schools, and it's not going to happen through a church where the kids go in there for what, 3 hours a week at the most. Family is that critical component. If we have strong families who understand, again, does the father have to be a philosopher? To a degree, we're all philosophers. We're just good ones or bad ones. Like the father, the mother, they should have a basic understanding of reality. This is why we educate, and why even, how am I able to pull? I studied the periodic table when I was 13, and remembering, like, I have a basic view of a large portion of our world. Some things I'm much more knowledgeable of, other things I'm not. But this is why, as we educate, we grow, we understand this. If we can have families that understand not just simply the Christian worldview, but creation itself, this thing that God has given us, then we're able to raise our children who understand that, and that law that's been written on our hearts will be written on our minds and our souls as well, and we'll live it out. And in a nihilistic world, though, you don't have that. You have this sense of guilt. This is what the nihilism, like, stop feeling guilty, stop worrying about it. Like, just, if you practice these things, you won't feel bad about it. That's literally how you cultivate vice. We talk about virtue. How do you cultivate virtue? You do the right thing. You train yourself in righteousness. You tell the truth repeatedly. You become the kind of person who habitually, regularly, easily tells the truth, because it's good, and because the Holy Spirit also is that convictor who says, if you're going to lie, you're going to be going against God. If we live in a world that says that there are no truths, there are no lies, there's just perspectives, and when you lie to get what you want, that's okay. The movies show it. They train us in that. Then you end up becoming the kind of person who lies quickly, easily, and with pleasure. That's the vice. That's what the world specializes in. And I think this is why nihilism separates from everything that is true, good, and beautiful, to focus simply on what brings the immediate pleasure and functionality. And as everybody begins doing this, and that Christian worldview basis erodes away, you're going to find the kind of people who are going to say, hey, if we just kill off this portion of the population, that'll make things a lot easier. This is where we are. This is what we're seeing, and why the church has the truth, has the answers. I think many have forgotten, and we need to remember.
And how do we do that? How do we, first of all, revive those to memory, and how do we then redeem the families and help on this frontline battle?
I mean, in some ways, that's really what our ministry is seeking to do. We want to strengthen the church. Like, when you look, where our goal is, we're cultivating virtue, We are strengthening the family. We're building churches. And when you look at like that, and people say building churches, we're not building church buildings. We're building the church, the people in the church. That's Jesus's mode of reaching the world. He established the church. So we don't need another thing like it's not going to be like in the case of families of virtue, like, you know, let's say that we grow and we become this massive ministry. That's not like, it shouldn't be us. It should be always through the church. The church is the one, that's the bride of Christ. That's the salt and light. That's the one that should show. We're doing a terrible job of it across the board by all metrics. That's a whole nother topic for another day. The anti-intellectual movement, the rejection of Christianity, the absorption of these non-Christian worldviews and ideas. That's all part of that. We almost need an army of people to rise up who understand that Great Commission, that we are baptized in the name of Jesus Christ, the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and we're taught to obey all that he's commanded, not from a sense of that external legalism. That's the other mistake. That's a vice. But we're taught to obey because we are Christ's. And through that Holy Spirit, 2 Peter 1:3, we have everything we need for life and godliness. This is what comes through the promises of God. We already have it. Okay. We're not accessing it. And that's why he says a little bit later in verse 5, make every effort to add with your faith virtue. And then he lists the 4 cardinal virtues in various forms. That, to me, that's the starting point. That was always, like I said, the missing link. That, you know, how are we going to engage a world that's filled with nihilism and scientism and all of these isms? We can go and try to attack them all, but it's almost like a philosophical game of whack-a-mole. You know, does that translate to South Africa? You know, whack-a-mole, like that
I know what
game where
whack-a-mole is.
yeah, the little moles pop up and you got to whack them. Okay. It's frustrating because they keep popping up and they're going to keep doing that. I think that was the error of many errors of many apologists. My error in particular, early in the day, I like to play whack-a-mole and I would go after them. But that's when I realized it's not just about going after all those things. It's about grounding and creating the kind of foundation that will withstand any of those things, because you need the kind of foundation, you need the kind of structure that the moles can't get into. That's what we have with the church. That's why our mission is to strengthen the families, because when you have strong families, you're going to have strong churches. And when you have strong churches, you're going to have a beacon of salt and light that can begin changing the community, begin changing the world. That's where it's going to happen from the inside. And it's a long game. I think that's the other thing. People want a quick fix. Like, what's the one seminar we can go to that's going to change everything? Doesn't exist. I've often said as a pastor, if I knew the sermon that I could preach that would change anyone that would hear it, I would give everything I own and everything you own in order to have that sermon. It doesn't exist. That's not how it works. That's not what Jesus instituted. He instituted a church that he said the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And that's true. Now, we also want to be an effective church wherever we are planted, because though the gates of hell will not stand against the church universal, there's many church local that are broken, fallen, and they need to be put back together in the image of Christ. That's where we have to start. And that's why part of what we do in maybe with some people who hear these ideas, hear these things, maybe what I hope is, and I try to use some of these ideas, somebody says, wait a minute, I thought that was true. Wait a minute, I thought that was good. And they're saying that's not true. That's not good. We need to almost reach the church. It's one of our ministry slogans is reach the pew. That's what we're targeting. I consider myself a missionary to the church. We need that. We need to reach the world. I'm not saying don't go out and do evangelism, but we need missionaries to the church to reach the church, to reestablish that foundation. We have it. We have a rich history. We have so much that can be reclaimed and put back into motion. That's where we are. That's the battle of the 21st century. Because as the church has gone through the world, this is what I'm seeing: the country of Nepal, Philippines, South Africa, China, every country I've ministered in, it's been the same story. We stink at discipleship, and the church is starting to cave in because of it. So that's where we are. That's what I hope, if anyone, if they're not inspired to learn philosophy, be inspired to gain the kind of foundation to build a church that will not crumble under the weight of these ideas.
Well, that kind of solidified it for me that after the last episode on this worldview series, we must have a conversation again about virtue and how do we basically it will be looked at all these different worldviews. What is the solution? How can we get back? In the beginning, in introduction, I kind of illustrated this mental picture of with Christian theism. You start on the top of this hill, and then with theism, you get closer to the edge, and then there's that slippery slope. We fall down into despair. And how do we get back on top of that hill? And I think it would be great to have that conversation with you. Yeah, so there's a lot to chew on. I think, like I didn't expect, like I knew some of the consequences, but like that movie that you spoke about, The Giver, that wrecked me. That wrecked me. But yeah. I hope this meant a lot to the audience, and I hope that they have a lot to think, meditate on, chew on, and hopefully it would bring them open ears for truth. Yeah, and once again, I'll put a link to your website in the description. Thank you very much for talking to me again.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Okay, guys, have a great time. Be blessed. Until next time, goodbye.